Okay, let's get into this real quick. So, here's what you need to know about Trump's future cutoff plan for food stamps. Now, they're currently pivoting. What happened recently was that Trump, by and through the USDA, notified the blue states back in February, well, technically all states, that they were going to go ahead and demand, request, however you want to put it, all of the recipients who were on their food stamp rolls. So, who was receiving food stamps? Now, the reason why is, as you know, Trump is all about, just to make it really clear here, figuring out where the fraud, the waste, etc. is. And they've been able to find a significant, massive amount of, fraud. Now, a lot of people on the left, the Democrat side, are arguing that Trump isn't really finding much fraud. And a lot of people on the right are arguing that he's finding gajillions upon zillions upon infinite numbers that only magically exist in the cosmos. But in the middle, which is where I tend to like to be, what they found is billions leading to potentially $1 trillion worth of fraud in different areas. One of the big areas in my field being Social Security, retirement, disability, SSI, Medicare, stuff like that, tends to be, Medicare is where the fraud is mostly occurring. But I don't do Medicare. I'm America's most viewed and subscribed to and clicked on disability attorney. So if you have Medicare questions, give these guys a call, 339-226-6287. I don't do Medicare. They do. Especially if you want to ask and get answers about which doctors are getting arrested, which back office staff are getting arrested, which nurses are getting arrested as a result of the fraud. Now, the Democrat side is leaning towards there's not really much fraud going on. It's all conspiracy. I am not a fan of that ideological push. And here's why. At the end of the day, every week I do videos on actual OIG arrested individuals or those who have been recently charged with crimes related to the abuse of Social Security benefits. I do this because I think it's important that people understand that A, the government has a division, OIG, Office of Inspector General, and these different administrations have an OIG or something like it, that goes out, follows around, and catches these people. Now, to be fair, a lot of disabled people feel a little bit scared about that because, some of them like to ride their Harley. Some of them like to go boating. Some of them like to do this, or that, which if they get footage of those individuals doing that stuff, have somebody investigate them, have somebody follow them around with 2 cameras on their body, then the footage is pretty damning, and they could potentially lose their benefits and have what are called the 3 whoopers, which is essentially administrative punishment, civil punishment, and criminal punishment. So at the end of the day, we have the Trump administration who basically through the USDA, specifically, the U.S. Department of Agriculture clarified after Secretary Brooke Rollins, who's like the head of that, made her comment on December 2nd, 2025. They, in a clarification from the original cabinet remarks, said, hey, while the USDA, secretary said that they were going to cut off food stamps in total, what they really meant for all of those blue states that didn't hand over, their rolls of people who were receiving food stamps, what they really meant was that they were just going to not pay the 50% of the administration fees for the benefits. In other words, there was a pivot that day, later that day. Let me explain why. So here's kind of the bottom line. Supreme Court rulings play a very large effect on how these politicians play their game, as it should. It makes sense that way, that it should be that way, etc. So at the end of the day, what's happening here is Trump is no longer through the USDA saying he's going to cut off all food stamps. He's just not going to pay for half of the administration of those food stamps for that month or any month going forward that they don't hand over the roll call of who's receiving food stamps in those blue states. Let me clarify. Food stamps are paid for by the federal government, but the administration of those food stamps are split between the state at 50% and the federal government at 50%. So what Trump is threatening now through the USDA is that they will cut off 50% of the funding to administer those benefits, which means that the states will have to pick up 100% of the funding to administer the food stamps. Now, why is this a brilliant plan for the Trump team? Why is it a brilliant plan for the 21 blue states that didn't hand over essentially their roll call list? Well, it's a brilliant plan for the Trump team because A, it makes the Democrats constantly look like they're hiding criminals. That's the reality. It makes the Democrats look like they are the chief of all fraud, and that they're good at hiding fraud, and that they've kind of, constantly restricted fraud. And when the Epstein files finally started to dribble out and they were able to collect them from the different agencies and distribute them, that got Trump out of the Epstein withholding information situation, which then brings up the whole question of what else did the Democrats have the option of releasing and then not release during Biden era principles, right? So what he was doing, what his plans were, etc. Now, I think everybody would agree, although I do get some people that are so extreme left that they don't agree, but I think everybody would agree that during the Biden era, fraud was the worst ever that I'd ever seen in the country. It was basically a unique situation where the gates to the entrance to the country were welded open. It was a time when basically extremists were trying to shift and change and modify the law of the Constitution to be what their law should be. And it was a time where basically we were having extreme racism, what many people would call reverse racism or whatever you want to tag it as. But basically, there were new rules coming in place to constantly reduce and restrict anything that was white male. And so what happened was a lot of lawsuits got filed. It got into the legal system. The judicial system was starting to make decisions on it, and things started to change. But all of that huge hurricane of problems lent to Trump getting elected again. And I just want to point out, a lot of people think Trump, there's no way that he could potentially be, absolutely no way that he could potentially be elected again. It was due to the incompetence of the Biden administration. And this unfortunate situation is that when Biden was doing a lot of these things or not present, using the auto pen, whatever, it allowed Trump to do these massive, massive rallies. And, unfortunately, at the end of the day, for the Democrats, they're in kind of a tight spot. They don't have, this situation where they have the clout of the, they don't have the high faith and moral high ground. And, they just seem like okay, let me put it this way. And some people are going to get really angry they're going to get pissed at me when I say this. It doesn't seem like the Democrats are just ignoring things or are incompetent or just like not aware. It seems like, to be fair, they are actively trying to create scenarios where they look like they are frauding the system. Obviously with some of the massive frauding that's going on up in Minnesota, a lot of the fraud that's going on a federal level, and then a lot of the fraud that happened on an international level. The amount of money sent to Africa for the different programs with USAID was, frankly, a blind eye that we should lock away. So now, because of all this, we have Trump. And the whole idea of Trump is his main push, slamming the gavel down is about getting rid of fraud, getting rid of waste. Now, to be fair, if we didn't have Doge, we wouldn't have learned of a lot of the crazy shit that was going on, right? Because keep in mind, they still had OIG, and they still had the OIG that oversaw the OIG during all of the Biden years. So things were being hidden from us. Even now, under the Trump administration, because things are coming out, we even have the age of disclosure, where the federal government has admitted to the legacy program, has admitted to basically, all these UFO, UAP, whatever things that are going on, they have biologics and all that stuff. So we're getting to see a version of the United States government that is actually more transparent now. Some will argue that it's not, and in some ways it's not, but for the most part, it is. And so I guess what I would say is this, at the end of the day, my big focus with understanding what's going to happen with food stamps and having you understand what's going to happen with food stamps is for you to understand the legal side of it. Other people will give you the emotional, the excitement of this and that. That's not really my thing here. My thing here is to have you understand what the legal case is and what the case law and the different statutes and the different, legal situations that have evolved, some of the culture in the judicial system, how it could affect this. I want you to understand that, because if you understand that, my big focus here is that you won't be as totally blown away and surprised when bleep hits the fan. Let me explain. So Trump has basically, through the USDA Department of Agriculture, through Secretary Brooke Rollins, originally stated that they were going to cut off food stamps to pretty much every single blue state next week. So somewhere around, we would expect December 9th, right? Actual food stamps were going to be cut off. Now they're pivoting and shifting and saying, instead of going ahead and cutting off all food stamps to every single blue state for those recipients who would be receiving them going forward, instead what they're saying is we're only going to cut off 50% of the administration costs that we normally pay towards it, which then puts the states in a position where they have to go ahead and cover, which I'm sure they're gladly going to willingly do. And of course, Trump is doing this because the strategy, which is not going to work, the strategy is that the poor and the super poor, super homeless, super etc., the chronically homeless, those who are basically without home, living in the woods, living in somebody's garage, living in the living room on a couch surfing, etc. The chronically homeless, the chronically poor, those individuals don't have the money to rally, or basically they don't have the knowledge base or background or excitement or just the agenda to call the Democrat, politicians and scream at them and say, you better go talk to Trump and work this deal out so that I get my food stamps. That's not usually how that group is. The middle class, which is the grand majority of people who voted for Trump, the middle class does that, but the super impoverished doesn't. The super impoverished, they have minute phones, right? They can't waste their minutes calling their politician because they need them to communicate with other people that they know are directly in their circle. They don't have money for a bus ticket to go and actually, to go out there and hold a sign and say, I believe in this. They don't have that money. Every single person that you see out there in some giant parade or giant this or giant that's holding a sign, if they don't have a job and they're not independently wealthy, they were paid for by somebody else to do what they're doing. So I don't think Trump understands that. And I think that that's a problem because Trump is expecting the poor to rally and force the Democrats to get their food stamps to be paid. I got to be honest with you. Trump does not understand the super poor, how they work, nor do the advisors that he has on staff. Keep in mind, a lot of the people Trump keeps around him are, pretty wealthy people. So they're a bit removed from that reality. So one thing that I would do to fix this problem is immediately get an advisor on the impoverished to work with Trump at the White House. Somebody who's willing to be at the White House, somebody who's willing to be there with him and tell him the actual effect this whole situation will have on the poor and what the poor will do as a result. Because Trump is playing chess, hoping that the poor and the homeless will do something. They're not gonna. They are not going to do the thing he wants them to do by him doing this. So here's basically something that you need to know. There is a law. It's called the spending clause limitation. It is the Dole test. Basically, when they look at whether a law is constitutional / within the Dole test, they look at the following elements. And these conditions must be met. Number one, the law, the thing that they're trying to do, so what Trump is doing here, must promote the general welfare. Number two, it must be unambiguous so states can knowingly accept or reject the law. C, it must relate to federal interest in the program. And D, not be coercive, aka threaten too large a portion of state's budget. And E, not violate other constitutional provisions. In other words, privacy under the 4th or 5th Amendment or anti-commandeering under the 10th. So the question is the federal government in line with demanding from all states that they hand over those who are on food stamps? Now, you might be saying, well, it should be a private list. Well, the federal government is the one who funds that, and that is funded from the working class. I think the working class would very likely vote. They would vote. There's no question about it. The working class would vote to have essentially an audit on those receiving food stamps. Seeing how they had in the hundreds of millions of dollars food stamp fraud, okay? Skimmers, 50% cash, swaps. Seeing how they had hundreds and millions of dollars over the past, 5 to 10 years, it's actually higher than that over 10 years. But seeing how they had that in the food stamp arena, I don't think the middle class would even blink for a second with pushing forward an agenda to vote through that every single recipient on the list of food stamp recipients needs to go to the federal government. Why do you think this is happening? Well, the federal government is going to use AI to run basically a scan through all the internet that they can get access to on every single SNAP food stamp recipient to see if there's any potential red flags for fraud. Are you a US citizen? Are you, using your food stamps in the area where you live? Because remember, people on food stamps are SSIers, or they're people without a job usually, you're trying to get a job, or working a little bit of a job, or working a full job and doing their transition. They don't really travel a lot. So if somebody's using food stamps in one county and then automatically food stamps are being used in 2 other counties in 2 other states, that's a problem because somebody is funding them to go different places. Maybe it's a holiday thing, maybe it's not, but that's what they're doing. They're investigating all the different food stamp recipients. Now, just to be clear, if we go through the elements again, here's what you need to understand. Number 1, does the rule that Trump is looking to go ahead and demand from the states and receive from the states every single name of every single food stamp recipients, does that law promote the general welfare? Well, the Democrats would say no, because they'll say that the feds shouldn't have their hands in the states list. The feds will say, well, then we're not going to pay for it. And then at that point, likely Trump will switch from just hey, we're only going to take 50% of the administration fees away. He'll likely switch then to not distributing any food stamps to those particular states. And let me assure you of this, the states do not have the money to fund food stamps. They could maybe do a month or 2, depending on which state it is, but the states do not have the money to fund food stamps. They require the federal government to do that. And let me explain something that's very, very important. The blue states, massive taxation. That's why a lot of companies move out of them. That's why a lot of people move out of them. If you look at U-Haul, right, the trucks that move people, U-Haul has to charge a lot more people moving from California to Texas or Florida because they have to have somebody drive the vehicle back to California, because the amount of people moving from Texas and Florida to California is extremely low because nobody's going to go to that I'm just going to say BS that's happening in California. I think most would agree that the politics in California is a level of stupidity not yet seen by the human race in America, and every year it gets worse. It is what it is. But that's why U-Hauls are so damn expensive in California to move out of California, because somebody else has to drive that truck back. So bottom line is this: does it make sense? Would it promote the general welfare that essentially this rule from, President Trump's team, the USDA, where they're demanding everybody's name on the list for food stamp recipients, does it make sense? Does it promote the general welfare? Well, having a country that's fighting fraud, I think would fall within that. I think that would be a very easy argument to make at the district, circuit, or Supreme Court of the United States. I think that would be easy to meet. Number 2, is the rule where Trump requires that every state give him the roll call on who's receiving food stamps, is that rule unambiguous so states can knowingly accept or reject them? Yes. It's very simple. Everybody knows exactly what it is. You have to send the current, most up-to-date list of recipients. That's the whole idea. Next one, C. Does the rule relate to the federal interest in the program? Absolutely. The federal government's trying to pay less food stamps by not having to pay for people who are frauding them. They have paid out they've probably, over the entire expanse of the program, probably paid out, billions upon billions of actual food stamp fraud, payments. But the bottom line is, just to be fair, yes, fighting fraud absolutely within and relates to the federal interest in the program. Next element, it must not be coercive. Must not be coercive, which means threatening too large a portion of a state's budget. Well, the thing is, Trump, obviously, if he pulls back 50% of the administration of the funding of SNAP benefits, that's going to take a hit, but the states could carry on. But if Trump cuts off entirely the food stamps, then that might look like it's actually being coercive. And remember, it's split right now. All of the red states, which there's quite a few more than the blue states, all of the red states essentially have already complied. Only the blue states came together and said, we will not comply. We will not send you essentially the list of people that we have. Now, ultimately, between you and I, we know Trump's going to find out who's on the list and who's not at some point very quickly. Whether he loses this with this particular argument or not, he's just going to go another way, another legal option, another legal case, another way that he's going to try and wiggle his way around it. That's going to happen. And let me explain why. Trump is willing to send in the National Guard, the military, into literal cities run by blue, blue Congress men and women to clean them up, where violence for the time while they're there will go from the highest in the country to the lowest that city has ever seen. So to be fair, if he's willing to do that, he's almost certainly going to get a copy of that list somehow. Okay. Next element. Does that rule that Trump requests all the names not violate any other constitutional provisions, privacy under the 4th, 5th Amendments, or anti-commandeering under the 10th? Now, what you have to realize is that food stamps are not part of a usual constitutional right. You have your highest constitutional rights, life and liberty, right? Then you get to your free speech. You get to your right to bear arms. Then you go down and go down. Then you get to your social security ones where you paid in. And then below that, right? So you have many levels down on rights that you have through the government. Below that, you get to food stamps. You didn't pay for food stamps, right? So that's not a regular social security level where you have an interest where you paid for it. And to be fair, it's a welfare-oriented program. So there's a bunch of restrictions. You have to meet all the restrictions. You have to do what they tell you to do to be able to get access to it, right? That's the whole idea here. So the whole thing here is, does it really violate your 4th, your 5th, maybe your 10th Amendment? Not realistically. So under this, I could see Trump making a very, very strong argument to get the recipient list for SNAP's benefits. I think at the end of the day, it's arguably either going to go that he should have access because he needs to figure out what fraud is going on, or he shouldn't have access because it's too coercive. But see, here's the thing. The coercive aspect of it was created by states that bound together politically to say that they wouldn't give it. All the other red states, which is the larger majority, already gave it, that list of recipients. So at the end of the day, to me, the problem is this coalition of blue states, they are restricting access to literally what the middle classes and the upper class are paying for. So ultimately, you can go through all of this, but the moment it comes down to a vote where the paying class, the people who have to work and earn money and pay, when the paying class finds the option to vote on whether or not they're going to have every single food stamp recipient on a list that the federal government can audit, you better believe they're going to vote that through immediately. Absolutely immediately. Okay. Now, there's another rule that you need to be aware of, and this is incredibly important. There is the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Again, Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which is 2 USC section 681-688. Now, what this does is it prohibits the United States president from withholding congressionally appropriated funds unless Congress explicitly authorizes it. So what this means is that in order for Trump to hold back all of those food stamps from people, Congress is supposed to actually, vote on it. They have to go ahead and, approve it. They have to explicitly authorize it. So that's why on December 2nd, when the USDA secretary came out, Rollins, and said, well, we're going to take away food stamps from all the blue states, they real quick during the next, update said, well, we're only going to not pay the administrative portion where we pay for half the staff who have to administer it, right? So, that's kind of the bottom line. Now, remember, at the end of the day, this usually leads to a court order, and the court order forces the Trump administration to go ahead and pay things out. Now, just to be very clear, okay, these funds, the food stamps, the SNAP benefits, they are annually appropriated every year. You get a year, and then somewhere around September into October, you have to do the, renewal, yada, yada. But bottom line is there's a farm bill. The Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018, which was extended through 2025, it basically allows withholding of benefits over data disputes. It does not allow, there's no provision, right? There's no specific thing that talks about whether or not benefits can be withheld as a result of a data dispute or some sort of data exchange not occurring. So to be fair, SNAP benefits, as it is written into the law, do not have a provision where they can't be paid or they can't be administered if there's a disagreement over the sharing of data. However, like I said, even if they lose this in court, the judges will be defeated because the people will just vote it through that the SNAP recipients have to be investigated. That's the reality. Okay. There's also, and remember, we covered the Dole test, then we did the Impound Control Act. So if you're just watching this video now and you're like, okay, what were the other rules? Go back and watch, the beginning part. Then there's also the Administrative Procedural Act, APA 5 U.S.C. Section 551-559. Now, before I go into that, please remember to like and subscribe and hype. Please hit that like button. A lot of people don't hit the like button while they're watching. I super appreciate it if you hit the like button. All right, what is it? Let's go through it real quick. All right, so here's the basic deal. Agencies, basically the USDA in this instance, they cannot be, the rules that they have, they can't be a rule where it's like arbitrary, capricious. These agency actions must be non-arbitrary. They must follow notice and comment rulemaking, where they post them, they get, comments on it, and then they change the rule based on what they need to do. And they need to, of course, stay within all the statutory requirements that are put in place. Now, if they were to hold all the benefits back, it probably would be ruled, to be fair, arbitrary and capricious. If not tied to some sort of pre-existing rule on the integrity of SNAP, which is 7 CFR Part 273. But what you need to remember is Trump is constantly doing things that are all about finding ways to hook into a prior law that allows them to go ahead and search for fraud and search for waste. Now, you also have, just to be clear, the 10th Amendment and the anti-commandeering, okay? So just to give you a little summary on what the 10th Amendment anti-commandeering does, the federal government can't push a state or force a state to enforce federal policies. So, basically, doing a traditional check or something like that, they can't force the states to do certain things. However, the federal government can usually, and this is what they usually do, not give them the carrot money that they need to do something, so that the state will want to go ahead and do what the federal government wants it to do, which is what they're doing here. They're saying, we're not going to give you the 50% administration of the benefits. You pay for it, have fun. And that was in Prince v. United States, 1997, which bars such commandeering. Now, here's why it's important. ICE originally requested basically lists. They pressured the states to assist the federal government when it comes to immigration to figure out who's here illegally, what are they doing here illegally, etc. Now, the Democrats wanted to hide lists. They wanted to hide people, create sanctuaries. Judges got arrested. At the end of the day, what really happened here was we had a situation. It doesn't totally make sense to me why blue states have gone to these extremes, other than they spent billions, potentially trillions, on bringing in people illegally, which is what they did. They literally flew people in that should not have been here legally. And they flew people in, they let, all these gates open, they paid for all these hotels, they paid for all this stuff, they tried to get them assimilated and integrated. They had mass amounts of immigration form fraud and abuse. There were literally thousands upon thousands of forms where people were saying that this house was going to cover them, this house was going to vouch for them, etc. So, just impossible things, lots of fraud. The hope and dream was that the blue side was going to get a lot of vote farming that would be successful. Trump came in as a result of all this fraud, which is what the blue side was doing. And at the end of it, now they're doing the last things that they can, the last bastions of hope that the blue side, the Democrats, have to keep as many potential future voters as they can get. Obviously, Trump is getting rid of a lot of the people they brought in. Okay, that's the reality. Yeah, I see Hunter 5-star hotels. Some of the hotels that these individuals, these immigrants, illegal immigrants, legal immigrants are staying in are nicer hotels than I have ever actually been in. You know what I mean? So it just is what it is. Yeah, and yes, they did kick out SSDI recipients. They did kick out retired people. They did kick out veterans. So to be fair, it was a very lawless time with the prior administration. Now, with that said, there's also the SNAP specific rules. The 2008 Food and Nutrition Act, 7 U.S.C. Section 2011. Now, here's the deal. The Food Stamp Act allows administrative fund withholding in a limited way, up to 50% for quality control failures, right? And that, just to read that so you understand it allows limited administrative funding withholdings. The federal government can hold up to 50% for quality control failures, but they can't withhold the actual benefits. States must protect basically the beneficiary privacy under 7 CFR section 272.1. And of course, there is, data sharing, safeguards, stuff like that. But as you know, and here's where the whole claim flips. This is like where the whole thing is important to understand. Undocumented immigrants are de facto ineligible. Again, undocumented immigrants are de facto ineligible, which means that these immigrants that are basically, here illegally, which there are quite a few, in the millions, what that means is that basically at the end of the day, these immigrants, unfortunately, that are here illegally have no right to be on the payment system for food stamps, and the states have no real rights to protect them in the sense of the Food Stamp Act. So undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants, they're ineligible. But, and it's just one of those things where at the end of the day, it's a data situation. Trump wants it. He wants to kick them off. He wants to export them back to other countries. They frankly should not be on food stamps to begin with. They should not be on food stamps. They should not be on SSI. They should not be on any of these programs, whether they stole a social security number and are living here illegally and screwing over some American's life because of that, or they're just basically, hiding out, doing what they can to survive. It's a situation where they've got to use the door, fill out the proper paperwork, and go through the process. Because being a U.S. citizen, as you've seen in many videos, as you've seen in many, very truthful documentaries, is like winning the lottery. Being born in the United States means that you will have a significantly higher advantage of being successful and having things in your life than other people. One of the things that the poor, not the homeless, but the poor tend to not realize is how good they have it. Clean sheets, a roof over their head that's like a real roof, not just like a piece of plastic that was, that came off some giant ship that was part of, cargo transport. A lot of the poor in this country are very unworldly. They don't know what's going on in the world. They don't know where they stand in like the standards of whatever. And so somebody that's impoverished in the United States lives like a middle class to sometimes in some parts, even in Africa, middle upper class compared to essentially other nations. So one of the things you have to understand is that because of the lack of knowledge of most poor people in America as to their worldly status, they automatically think they have it worse than anybody anywhere on earth. And that's an interesting study where they should go ahead and, they should go ahead and actually study like where people are at more and then deliver the information and advertise it. Not that it's going to fix things, not that it makes being poor better. It just helps people understand why people would literally leave their country to come here and be quasi-homeless, quasi-impoverished, steal a social security number, stuff like that. They do it because other countries, it's vastly worse. Just to clarify, in other countries, the law is in many situations, so hyper biased. The law, many times, will take the lives of their own citizens and nothing will happen as a result of it. The government won't be punished, so on and et cetera. I mean, it's a much worse situation. Not that doesn't happen in the US, but we have a lot more safeguards and we follow a lot more safeguards than these other nations. And which is why a lot of impoverished people in this country say it's so unfair. It's the worst I've ever lived. I can never live like this. Nobody has as bad as me. But then when you go look at essentially those people who are living in the Middle East, those people living in Africa, those people living in some of the pocket areas of China, Southeast Asia, things like that, it gets much worse. It gets much, much worse. In America, I was at the homeless facility yesterday working with the homeless directly. In America, we have a lot of these facilities that are, if you're by the city or in the suburbs or right on the outskirts of the city, where you can go get, food, a shower, a telephone, a this, a that, or whatever, sometimes even a bicycle, right? But that's not how it is in other countries that are in those particularly bad spots. And there's that problem that's going on. And I don't think Trump is doing a good job helping people understand why so many immigrants came here. The opportunities are incredible. The opportunities are all over the place. So real quick, I want to do a shout out for Shelly, 97633, member for 5 months, which is absolutely amazing. She said, my apologies to you, Walter, and to all in the chat. Anxiety is swallowing me. Yeah, so I don't want you to fear losing food stamps. It's just the states are likely going to have to pay, in the blue states, the Democrat states, 50% of the administrative costs. So it's not like you're still going to get them, but it might take a little longer to get them. They might have to process them and be a little late when they get the check to you. You know, it could be a day late, 5 days late, whatever, because they're not going to get the funding that they normally have to administer them. Again, with the $5 donation, thank you, Shelly. Let me put a big heart there. That's awesome. So, yes, and Christine does a really good point here. Walter works at a homeless shelter every Wednesday for 12 years. He has 3 jobs. He said when he sells his law firm, he will need a therapy from carnage. Yeah, that is true. That is like the perfect summary. Christine got the perfect summary there. I have 3 jobs. So right now it's my lunch, and I'm doing this video to explain to you what's going on because there's a lot of misinformation out there right now. I just want everybody to be like super clear on how this works, what the law is. But I got the 3 jobs, which is law firm during the day, work on the rental, which is still not done. I have tons of hard drives with tons of footage. It's just I don't have time to edit them at the moment. And then, of course, YouTube normally at night. And I will be live tonight to go live. I promise you I will be doing that. So let's go through some of these Supreme Court cases real quick. But first, Brandy, Christian, thank you for the $10 donation. That's absolutely amazing. Love little hippo there. Very, very cool. And a member as well. I can't, there's no heart option for me to put it on there, but super thank you. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. So here's what you need to know about upcoming relevant Supreme Court case interaction with this situation. There's this case called South Dakota v. Dole, which is that whole Dole situation where we went through the elements. That's kind of your most on-point case that's going to decide what happens going forward. So like, you know, it upheld basically withholding 5 to 10% of highway funds from states not raising drinking age to 21. Conditions must meet the Dole test, general welfare, ambiguous. And we went through basically what those actual things are. But the point is, the government, the federal government, can squeeze, they can force states in a certain way to go ahead and do things so long as they're not too extreme, too unambiguous, too, you know, capricious, too this or that. And I don't think that this is reaching into that. Some legal scholars say that this is too extreme, too this, too that. But I don't think the federal government being able to audit the states when it comes to food stamp recipients, especially after Biden, like, you know what I mean? Like if this was like a regular situation, the Democrats would have more background, but because of Biden and mass immigration with illegal immigrants into this country with open borders, like it's just, it does not make sense that we would not go ahead and review the food stamps. You know, food stamps, everybody thinks the money's always just going to be there. But to be fair, the middle class is not good. And I just want to go ahead and point out the middle class is especially not good for a couple of reasons. Number one, the money is massively devalued that they earn. So they'll work a job, right? And they can't really afford stuff. So if you're working a McDonald's job or a Wendy's job or this or that, you're barely able to afford stuff. In fact, a lot of those people have to have food stamps to carry them. And a lot of people who work for like places like Walmart and stuff like that, they can't get full time. They schedule, the corporate companies schedule it out so that everybody gets a couple hours, so that they have a huge net of people that they can call on in case somebody doesn't show up, because they keep those workers hungry for hours. That's how they get them to show up for more hours. So, all right. So basically, South Dakota v. Dole, I could see it going more towards Trump's favor. Other legal scholars state it won't, but I could see it going more in his favor. Then there's the National Federation of Independent Business versus Sebelius. That was 567 U.S. 519. Again, 567 U.S. 519. They struck down the ACA's Medicaid expansion threat, which was basically to lose all Medicaid funds, as it was unconstitutional. Doggies are rolling over there. As it was unconstitutional. It was unconstitutional because it was coercive under the spending clause in the 10th Amendment. And withholding expansion funds was upheld as voluntary. So basically, you know, just to be clear, that's another case that talks about the federal government, interacting with the states when it comes to threatening, what the federal government's power is to threaten, and how likely it is that, the federal government can be coercive towards the states. And, the states are saying it's only the blue states, but to be fair, they created that legal situation. They all specifically and purposely banded together to withhold their lists. The grand majority of lists have already been handed over. They've already been searched through. They've already been gone through with AI. If you're in a red state, you've already been investigated. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's already done. It's done. You know what I mean? It's already over. So then there's Train v. City of New York. Then you've got basically, this was a Nixon's impoundment situation. The Nixon's impoundment, it ruled Nixon's impoundment of clean water funds was unlawful. Executive cannot refuse to spend appropriate funds without statutory authority. So it directly bars unilateral SNAP benefit withholding. Courts would likely order immediate release, even at the district, circuit, and supreme level. So that's why basically Trump is not going to be able to have all food stamps restricted and received, or restricted from being received in those blue states. It's the Train v. City of New York case, which is 420, 1975 US 35, which is a Supreme Court case. That's why Trump is not going to be able to cut off food stamps completely, but he's going to kill off the administration funds paid for by the federal government to administer, to pay the people who sit there and click through the accounts and then get basically the benefits to be paid. Then you have Clinton versus City of New York. Struck down the item veto act, the line item veto act. Basically, a president cannot cancel appropriations post enactment as it amends laws unilaterally. So they can't like get rid of benefits once they've already been voted in to a people. So, you know, just canceling it, cutting it off. The president does not have that power. He can't do an executive order to go ahead and do that. So, you know, just to be fair, that kind of reinforces the Impoundment Act, which is, you know, essentially the USDA's move to go ahead and stop paying benefits. It's not going to happen. It's just they don't have that power. Then there's Prince with a Z, Printz versus United States. That's 1997, 521 U.S. 898. 10th Amendment bars federal commandeering of state officials, you know, for background checks. But to be fair, again, there's a lot of people on these food stamp roll calls, identity, you know, lists that basically have illegal immigrants, and it becomes a question of fraud. I think Trump is going to probably win this one. Other legal scholars are saying he won't, but I think Trump is going to win getting the list, because at the end of the day, there's enough evidence to show that there was a shock to the nation of abuse. Almost, I mean, it was treasonous actions on behalf of Kamala and Biden to go ahead and, you know, allow the borders to be open, allow mass immigration. You know, we got a lot of Haitians, Somalis, Africans, a lot of Middle Easterners, South Americans came into this country in the tens of millions that normally would have had to go through traditional methods for naturalization. So I think Trump is actually going to be able to win this one with the court system, because we're in a state of emergency where the country basically imported a massive military size worth of immigrants into this country who were never supposed to be here in the first place, because we only allow so many immigrants in per year. That's how we do it. That's how it works. Okay. Then you have the Agency for International Development versus the Alliance for Open Society International. That was 570 US 205 2013, which was reaffirmed in 2020. Basically, that struck down the conditions forcing anti-prostitution groups to adopt U.S. views. Conditions cannot compel speech or policy behind the fund use. So basically, if it allows, like if they get the list, enables ICE actions, it compels states to adopt federal immigration views, risking First Amendment challenges. So if lists enable the ICE group, you know, to do things, right, it compels the states to adopt federal immigration views. And they're saying, hey, under this Agency for International Development versus Alliance of Open Society International, which was just recently, 2020, like validated, it was reaffirmed, it struck down the conditions forcing anti-prostitution groups to adopt the U.S. views, you know, conditions. They can't force certain conditions on the states to go ahead and do certain stuff. But again, I don't know. To be honest, I think Trump is going to be able to make a claim that because of Biden's, you know, border czar and his total lack and complete, we've never had that in our history. We never had. Like if you go back to, you know, President George Washington, everybody knew who was everybody, because the groups, the states, the colonies, everybody knew everybody. So while fences were being built, they knew who was supposed to be there and who wasn't supposed to be there. And then every single year after that, more fencing, more fencing, more fencing, more fencing, more restrictions, more restrictions, more restrictions. Obama, I mean, if you look at how many people he deported, holy cannoli. I mean, he was, massive deportations. But again, I think Trump is going to be able to use that America is in a state of emergency to get all these people who are fraudulently taking money. And again, if he does not win with the court system, if they put it to a vote, I can almost assure you that it will pass, because every single middle class, upper class, wealthy, rich person is going to vote that the states have to hand over the list of recipients for an audit. I can almost assure you of that. Even if the Supreme Court rules on that and they put a new vote to it, they'll vote it through. The Supreme Court will try and knock it down. Then the people will vote through another one, and then the Supreme Court will give it up, because ultimately the Supreme Court, usually through the Chief Justice, will let the legislature do the direction of where they want the United States to go if they vote it through twice. Okay. That's usually what happens with that. Okay. Now, you have to understand there's some sideline cases that you have to keep in mind. These are more about private groups handing over their list of food stamp recipients. That's like the NAACP versus Alabama in 1958. That was 357 U.S. 449, the foundational case of whether or not private groups have to hand over or disclose their membership list. And, we all know what happened with that one. The Supreme Court unanimously held that basically, forced disclosures, compelled disclosures of membership, in a controversial advocacy group, or pretty much private groups in most situations, would violate the First Amendment right of private group association. So bottom line is that might actually show up as a potential case relating to this. But again, states go by different rules than private groups. There's another case as well over here, which is Bates v. City of Little Rock, 1960, 361 U.S. 516, Supreme Court case, of course. It extended that the NAACP versus Alabama to local ordinances. It said Little Rock, Arkansas requires organizations to disclose membership and contributor lists under the Tax Occasional License Ordinance. I remember that was a local ordinance where they were going after it. The court struck it down, and as applies to NAACP, reaffirming that forced disclosure is unconstitutional when evidence shows it will deter membership and contributions. Now, whether Trump does an investigation into this list of people, whether it would deter membership, I don't think it's going to deter membership, because people who need food stamps are going to apply for food stamps. They don't have a choice. It's not like they have a choice here where they're going to be like, oh, I think today I won't apply for food stamps because today I'll just starve. It's not going to change the membership numbers other than getting rid of people who were investigated and then arrested. So, but remember, that was basically against the state, right? Supreme Court ruled against the state for local ordinances. So you might see Bates v. City of Little Rock popping up. That one might get its place in the brief that's ultimately done by the Supreme Court if it goes to the Supreme Court. Then you have Gibson v. Florida Legislative Investigation Committee, 1963, 372 U.S. 539. Then basically Florida tried to force a Miami NAACP to bring its membership records to a legislative hearing investigating communist infiltration. The court again protected the list, holding that the state's interest was insufficient to override the chilling effect on First Amendment rights. I mean, do people who are food stampers have rights to not be known by the federal government? I feel like the NAACP would have a greater right to it because of what it is. I mean, for obvious reasons. I don't feel like food stamp recipients would have that same level of right to be protected with privacy from the federal government figuring out who they are. And the reason why, again, is that the federal government pays for this, and they pay through it by the power and authority of the people who are paying taxes. And the people who are paying taxes, which is the grand majority of people, whether Trump gets it through on this or the people vote on it, they're going to vote to have people be investigated. Like SSI benefits, food stamp benefits, welfare benefits, SNAP benefits, TAMP benefits, all that stuff. Future rules are going to be based on basically investigating those people. That's the future. Like if you're on something that you didn't pay for, almost certainly you're going to be investigated. Almost certainly. Like, that's the future. That's the way it is. That the reason it is that way is that People are tired of the fraud. That's why Trump got in. Like I kept hearing Democrats go, he got in illegally, he got in this and that, whatever. He got in because Biden was that bad and Kamala Harris was even worse. That's why he got in. I know some of you love Kamala and Biden. You raise them in your garage and let them sleep in your closet and you fed them 3 times a day. I know that. I get that. But to be fair, it's never been that bad. It's never been that bad. Like, I mean, you could say, well, and then there's the people who always say he created more jobs than any president in the history. No, that was COVID. They forcibly restricted people going to work and then let people go back to work. You don't count that as creating jobs. You count that as the jobs, the companies that held on were able to continue to hire back the people that they had. It's just, there's so much shenanigans right now. It does frustrate me. It really does frustrate me. All right, next one. We got Louisiana, Gramillion versus NAACP 1961, similar outcome. Louisiana statutes requiring disclosure of membership were held unconstitutional as applied. Just to be fair, a big difference in these cases is that the federal government isn't paying for them to the states. In these cases, the states weren't paying the NAACP, for something or whatever. There wasn't that interest. There wasn't that regulatory situation. It's that the states were investigating the NAACP for communists that were part of their group. Were there communists in the NAACP? Absolutely. That's why they were doing this and trying to get investigations. Were communists thought of as like the big bad back in the day? Yeah, because Americans were scared, of basically Russia. After World War II, just to be very clear, Germany, Europe, very destroyed, right? But Russia got a lot of power. It was that power vacuum where they could do a lot of stuff that they wanted to do. It was unchecked, pushed forward. America had the same thing. America has been the number one nation on planet Earth for the longest time because of the success of World War II. Otherwise, it would be a very different outcome. Otherwise, I would not be here because I'm an Ashkenazi. I'm a German Jewish person that his family had to immigrate away from Austria, Ukraine, and Germany because obviously Germany was not so popular for Jewish people during the 30s and 40s. Next one, Buckley v. Vallejo, 1976, 424 US 1. Basically, it was a campaign finance case. Reaffirmed NAACP principle in the context of minor political parties. Court recognized an exemption from disclosure requirements when a party shows a reasonable probability that disclosure will subject members to threats, harassment, or reprisals. The minor party exemption later codified in campaign finance law, but basically the idea is they look at reasonable probability that disclosure will subject members to threats, harassment, or reprisals. Now, here's the thing. For those of you who are in red states, have you been threatened by the state or federal government when it comes to food stamps that you will lose your food stamps because of the investigations done by the federal government? Probably not. I mean, you might get recertification letters. You might get like, hey, you're not meeting the work requirements. You might get those letters, but you haven't actually faced essentially, some sort of bias, some sort of situation like this, where, you essentially are harassed or threatened by the Trump administration doing the investigations. Because a lot of you, you're not here illegally. You know what I mean? You're receiving food stamps because you're poor. You're receiving food stamps because you work a job, and that job doesn't give you enough hours to pay you enough to go ahead and survive in America. Then there was the Americans for Prosperity Foundation v. Bonta, 2021, recent case, 594 U.S. 595. Most recent major reaffirmation of 6-3 decision. California required all charities to file with the state a copy of their IRS Form 990 Schedule B. And that's where it lists all the people who made those big donations, okay? Supreme Court struck down the requirements as financially unconstitutional under the First Amendment, applying an exacting scrutiny standard and citing NAACP v. Alabama. It held that broad compulsory disclosure of donors or members is unconstitutional unless it is narrowly tailored to be a sufficiently important government interest, which California's blanket requirement was not. So the bottom line is this, when it comes to major donors, when it comes to a cooling effect on people donating towards a group, when it comes to whether or not the law is specifically tailored to target a specific group, These are all things that the courts look for to say whether or not somebody has to hand over a list of people. Because remember, at the end of the day, this whole thing, the whole shenanigans of this is about, will the states hand over their list of people who are on food stamps? If the country rules that food stamp lists cannot be handed over, then we will have forever and ever massive abuse of food stamp recipients, specifically, obviously, in the blue states on the Democrat side. We will just continuously and repetitively have that. They will have massive food stamp rolls, even though there are more food stamp recipients on the red state side. You will see an uncontrolled, unreviewed, not properly audited, food stamp recipient list where the middle class, once again, and the upper class will be paying for lots of people who should not be receiving food stamps. And remember, middle class is pissed. They can't afford vacations because they have student loans, because their account, if they earn more, student loans take more. So what happens is these student loans, just so that you're aware, the more money that goes into your account, the more money they take away. So, student loan recipients, I'm going to be paying student loans until I'm like 60 something. That's just the reality. I'm actually going to do a video showing you guys where my student loans are at now. They're under 300,000 now. But the point is, these student loans, like the more you make, the more they take. So you never actually get ahead. You're always just kind of like in this position where you're shit out of luck. And, if you're smart, you'll make good deals. You'll Facebook Marketplace, you'll eBay things where they mismark the title and you'll win stuff and do stuff. That's what I've had to do most of my life. I've had to go ahead and Facebook Marketplace stuff, sell stuff, make stuff, whatever, to try and get stuff that I can use to do more stuff with. But rest assured, those recipients of student loans, for the rest of their life, they're stuck. Whatever money they make, the more money they make, the harder they get hit. The program increases what they're going to take out of your bank account. CF Rob, howdy, good sir. Very good. $1.99 donation. Let me put a big heart there. Walter for president. If we lose all our benefits. So here's my thing. Like, I'm a firm believer in the social net. Social net gets a bad name because attached to it is socialism. But to be fair, and I just want you to understand this, we have a country that has a bad culture problem. And the culture problem is we have a country where, on the Republican side, it's rah, 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 work your fingers to the bone so you can have a better life. Well, that shit doesn't happen anymore because you can't get past student loans, okay? On the left side, you have take it easy. We got some welfare options for you. SSI is always going to be there for you. We'll catch you if you fall, right? You have these two extreme sides. And as a result of that, in my preference, the greatest country on earth should not have to force people to work their fingers to the bone to get ahead. There should be limits on how much you have to do, but there should be no restrictions on how much you can do if you want to do it. On the left side, just unrestricted mass immigration, unrestricted search and, find abuse on these lists of recipients. We can't do that. The middle class can't afford it. It's always been a weird thing for me when the politicians blame, and it's usually the Democrat politicians blame the Republican voters, where the Democrat politicians will blame the Republican voters for telling the Republican voters that they should be ashamed of themselves because they don't vote themselves to have more taxes to pay for more people who don't actually pay for the benefits they receive. Think about that. Saying somebody is not moral because they have to pay for something that somebody else doesn't have to pay for, that is immoral. The only time people should be receiving, in my opinion, welfare-oriented benefits are if they have young kids and they don't have a stable environment, if they're disabled, if we're trying to rehabilitate them to get back to work. Otherwise, people that have generationally lived without a vocational track, that is totally inexcusable for me. And I know this because I've worked with many of them to get them onto SSI benefits. And I mean, they are, because many of them become disabled because they exist in that waterfall. When you have a disabled parent, the likelihood of your children becoming disabled greatly increases. And it's usually falling into there was a genetic issue or there was some sort of attachment to anxiety, depression, panic attacks, schizoaffective hearing voices, schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever. We have to break the culture that's happening in families because those families are miserable. They are absolutely miserable. When they study how sad and upset people are, the people on the Republican side are far less on the graph upset with where their life is and where they're going. They're not happy. Student loans are very shitty. They're paying for a lot of stuff that's not good, but they're not super ultra miserable. However, on the left side, people are emotionally destroyed. The graphs that show how unhappy they are, especially of females, specifically white females on the Democrat side, the statistics show that they are emotionally distraught at incredible levels. And I gotta ask myself, like, what at the end of the day is the problem that's making Social Security benefits run out so that the retired can't actually live their retired life? Well, that's because we're taking money from basically the middle class that can't afford to give money because they have student loans that can't be paid off over their life because of a devaluation of the dollar, reduction of jobs, increase in AI, and increase in robots. And that then creates instability. People become very unwilling to go ahead and create a relationship with somebody else. They feel very unstable. They don't have kids. They don't feel the purpose of having a child and taking care of a child. And then we don't have enough new people being born to replace the people who are already getting out of the work environment. And then, you guessed it, the social net fails because we don't have enough workers. It's just like, I don't know. If this country wanted to fix the problem, like the long problem, they would have to actually find a solution for AI and more humans. That's the big thing. Now, in my opinion, the greatest evidence that Social Security as a program is going to fail is that the politicians are getting voted in by voting out all the 1979 and 1983 restrictions put on Social Security to basically, continue the program's length of time that it could continue to go ahead and afford things. Well, the politicians are voting all that stuff out. They know it's coming. They know 2031, 2032, somewhere around there, retirement benefits are going to significantly decrease to about a person getting 3/4 of their regular check. They know that. They know that's coming, and they don't have a plan. In fact, the plan is to vote out the things that restricted the benefits so that they would last longer. I guess from my perspective, what I would like to see is a reality check. The Republicans are a bunch of people who achieved a lot. The Democrats are a bunch of people who achieved a lot, but then claim that they're for the poor. There's some masks that a lot of these people wear. If we're honest with each other, on one hand, we can tell who should be in the social net and receiving assistance, right? It's not hard. Let's do it right now. We're just going to make it up right now. We're going to literally, in this moment, just make it up. Number one, the elderly. Number two, the disabled. Number three, young parents. Number four, those going through some traumatic transition. And number five, just to be clear with this one, the increased likelihood of creating families that make children. Boom, that's it. Do we need to give SSI benefits to SSI recipients for 7 years? No, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. We don't need to give them Medicaid and SSI for 7 years with a 2-year up option. We don't need to do that. I get that they're either refugees, asylum seekers, or trafficked, but to be fair, refugees and asylum seekers, that list has a real big chunk of people on it. You know what I mean? Especially after the Biden administration's just mass allowances, mass naturalization. We know it's coming. We know if we keep doing what we're doing, if we kept doing the Biden thing, we'd end up like Sweden. We'd end up like France. We'd end up like Germany. We'd end up like London. London is cooked. They're done. The great conquerors of planet Earth, they just lost. I mean, that's mind-boggling. That's mind-boggling. Anyways, With that said, I have to go back to work because we're getting close to 1 and my lunch hour is about to end. Attorney Walter Hnot, the most viewed, subscribed to, and clicked on disability attorney. Please remember, I don't do Medicare stuff. Medicare questions, call them. Don't call me. I get questions. People call me about Medicare questions. Don't call me. Call them. With that said, please, if you get a chance, you enjoy these videos, like, subscribe, and hype. If you really want me to be happy and you're like, wow, I want to help them out, head over to Google, business profile, disability resolution law firm, throw some stars up there. I will be live tonight to answer questions for free. I know I didn't do that earlier this week. I was too tired. I was getting accounting stuff done. Accounting is a horrible, horrible thing for me. I hate it. It's like watching something pass away in front of me. It is the worst thing ever for me. It's done. It was done last night. I was literally sitting there at a Waffle House, going back and forth with the tax accountant, going through all the details. It was super late. You're wondering why I was at Waffle House, because it was the only place that was open. I needed food. I was bleeding out kind of with my brain. So the bottom line is that's done. Now my life goes forward. So also, a lot of the people who just paid for private sessions where you do the half an hour, 1 hour thing, I will get to you today. We will schedule all your things today. I see you on there. If I don't get to you today, if you don't get a call from me, then call the law firm tomorrow. But I am going to get to everybody and get them scheduled. I know there's a bunch of them. I've been doing the accounting. I will catch you all tonight. Please remember to stay healthy, be happy, and I will do some additional videos on there's some more breaking news coming out. So tonight, we'll rock and roll. I'll catch you a little bit later. And have a wonderful, wonderful Thursday. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.